Hello, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well today. Welcome to our second FHIR Foundational Series session by Digital Square. This session is going to focus on creating the basics for documenting a FHIR specification for a project or a country or an individual. For those of you who don't know Digital Square, we work with innovators, governments, donors, to support country digital health programs. One of the ways we do that is we support adaptable, interoperable tools that are designed to work seamlessly and through webinars like this to support the community. So before I get started, I know I saw one person introduce themselves, but I'd love to see who's on this call. So if you want to throw in your name, where you work, and your favorite ice cream flavor, would love to know a little bit about who's here. And as you do that, I will just go ahead and walk you through some house rules. Since I'm going to ask that we all keep our microphones muted during this session, as so we can hear Jose as easily as possible. I will be. Oh my God, I can share that. Okay, sorry. I'll be dropping a Google Doc in the chat where you can use it for just doing collective notes, any sorts of comments or suggestions that you want to leave us, any thoughts on future webinars, and you can also find registrations for future webinars in our past recorded webinars. This session is going to be a little bit interactive. I think as you maybe filtered in, you might have heard Jose talk about how we will be doing an activity. I'll ask that you guys throw your questions in chat so we can try and go through them quickly rather than just unmute. But we will try and call on you so it can be a little bit more of an interactive session. And then we will save some time at the end for questions. So again, as I drop in that Google Doc, I can throw in questions and we'll filter through those as well. And then before we do a final start, this is the time of COVID and we don't get to see the folks we're talking to very often. So we'd love to take a photo of this group. So if you guys don't mind coming off of camera for a second, I will just take a quick screen grab and I can see everyone. That's awesome. Thank you. Come on, guys. We can do it. There you go. All right. Not a lot of showings, but I'll take it. That's perfect. A few more stragglers, you can do it. All right, everyone, count of three. 1, 2, 3. Say cheese. Awesome, thank you. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Jose. Just a couple of words about who he is. He is a data management standards and interoperability consultant who has worked in this sector for over 20 years. Jose has developed digital health tools like Orbis and Impacts. He has been involved in integration products such as the development of integration and data analytics systems in Europe and Latin America. He's worked with integrations in a large hospital group in Paris, as well as contributed to the National Integration Framework in Belgium. He's also the co-chair of IHE Pharmacy, as well as an avid supporter and contributor of FHIR. And he has been contributing to global health standards like HL7, IHE, and ISO since 2009. He also facilitated the launch of HL7 IHE work groups in Brazil, Portugal, and Belgium. So he knows his stuff. And guys, I'm not seeing your names or your ice cream flavors. So come on, let us know who's here. And with that, turning it over to Jose.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for this great introduction, Rhonda. The session today will be indeed first part. I will be doing most of the talking. Please come up with questions. Then further ahead, we would like to have a bit more of interaction. So the idea is that we start with the theoretics of what is FHIR profiling. It's very easy, but there is quite a lot of content. So we will do like we did the other session, which is here is everything you need to know in a very shallow approach. And then as you go through this, you know, well, he mentioned this or these are the pages. So we'll provide you a couple of links, a couple of the backbone that you need to learn by yourself or to join other courses, so that you are at least prepared to go in the right direction. You will not leave here fully proficient in how to make profiles of FHIR for all flavors. We should be able to do a couple of interesting things at the end of the day. But the important thing is that you know, when would I do a profile? Why would I do a profile? How do I do a profile? The rest, if we do have to do a slicing with a pattern or something, so there are a bit more complicated stuff, but that is something that you will have to learn as you go through the experience yourself. So the first part is pretty much the theory of that. Then a bit more dense topic, which is the how to do this. So the things that we need to know to create a profile. What is this? Is the technical mechanisms that FHIR puts at your availability to do that. So the technical know-how how to do this. And then after a short break, we will actually challenge you to have some profile or to do some profile live. So I will introduce a bit the tools that we can use, some of the tools that we can use. I'll use the one that is simpler for me. I will introduce other tools. But I would like to then in the third part of this to be driven by your needs or by your ideas. It can be wacky ideas, can be completely crazy ideas. The interesting thing is that we have a notion of this is how it's done. So I would propose a topic like COVID vaccine, because no one has ever thought of that in the last few months. And then if we start with that topic, we can say, well, let's do a prescription. What would a prescription profile look like? Because this does not exist in the base standard. Okay, what would the administration look like? And this is the kind of things that I would suggest that we use. And then the third part, so that third part is going to be quite interactive. And I look forward for your challenges and ideas there. So with that in mind, I would start the actual session by proposing the agenda of what we are going to do. Let me put my screen in presenter mode and see if it shows the right screen. It doesn't, so I'll have to swap the screens and then hit my sharing button, which now is concealed. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen now or soon. Can you signal when you do it? When you do see it? Thank you. So the agenda for today would be something along these lines. We will have the house rules as Rhonda just mentioned. I will just go quickly through the agenda now. Then we have a bit of the why we do profiling. So in what circumstances do we do profiling? In what circumstances we take what is out of the box, whatever that box is. That's part of the goals for today. Then what it means to do profiling, functional profiling, technical, so functional aspects of profiling, technical aspects of profiling. In short, it will be a description of, well, when we do profiling, we take something that is general purpose and we make it purpose specific. And then we see what in FHIR allows that. And then we go into how we do this. And for that, and for the interactive example and Q&A at the end, we have the process of profiling. So it's not really someone says, I want to make a profile. No, there should be some process behind it. There is most likely an analysis phase. There's some technical implementation, which is the core of today, and then some agile review. And it doesn't hurt us to frame this thing into a process, because many of the things that I've seen, and so the session today is not just to dump the content, it's also to share good practices or some shared experience that I gained and others have gained, and I will channel now about things like if you do a profile for something that is wrongly specified, then it's better to hold off and say, hey, we need clear requirements, or the requirements should be better defined. And this is the part of framing on the process that we would go through. Then the artifacts that are part of the profiling experience. So data profiling, behavior profiling, and there we see the 5 resources for that. How do we do profiling on vocabulary? So value sets, code systems. How do examples fit in there and why examples fit in there? And then a bit of support like capability statement, maybe other things depending on the interest. Yeah, so with this, we will end up with a good overview of what needs to be known when we do profiling. And that is the goal for today, to enable you to learn for yourselves, to dig in through the details as much as you want, without, of course, trying to condense normally what would be a 2-3 day course into a couple of hours. With that, some disclaimer: FHIR is a registered trademark, so whenever we mention FHIR, we have to put this trademark here. Special attention that what we are doing here is not an endorsement of this course by HL7. So HL7 gives freedom for everyone to share their experiences, but this doesn't mean that they endorse this course as one of their courses. In fact, the proper, let's say the formal trainings in HL7, those are things that you can always and you should always look up in hl7.org. So all the materials here are freely available. They are collected from elsewhere on the web. They are, I think today we have all of our content comes from HL7 FHIR specification. So everything comes from the HL7 spec, and the links are there. So just for sources and intellectual property rights concerns, those are covered. And this presentation is shared under Creative Commons attribution license, which means share it as you will, share the content as long as you give the credits, as we are giving the credits to the people that created the materials in the first place for us to use it. So today, let's understand and apply the concepts of HL7 FHIR profiling, what it means and how does it work, and do some experience as I mentioned. I would like to ask now if there's anyone in this session that has not yet created a chat.fhir.org account. I start with this. Last time I ended with this, because this is if you want to get serious about profiling. So if you want to do it, that's the first thing that you have to have. If you don't check that checkbox, your level of support or your level of catching up speed, let's say, will be quite inferior to what it is if you join the community. It's open, it's freely available for everyone. There is no impediments there, except being polite, I guess. But feel free to join the discussions and join chat.fhir.org. If you haven't done it, please create an account as soon as you can. Don't wait for all the knowledge to be, or for you to feel more knowledgeable and then join the community, because that's the other way around. Join the community in order to be more knowledgeable. And finally, one reference to the upcoming event, Dev Days. So Dev Days is a meeting of people from around the world that are FHIR enthusiasts, FHIR developers, FHIR adopters, FHIR developers, people that work on the tools, people that work on the specification, people that work with FHIR, people that just have an opinion about standards or whatever. It's really a big gathering of people, mostly technical discussions, but also strategical discussions. And we would also like to invite you to join some of these events. And since they are now at reduced fee, well, the early bird just ended a few weeks ago, but you can join those sessions. They are virtual. That's one of the few advantages of this, is that everything is more accessible because they are all virtual. So with that, I would look at FHIR profiling. Why? One question, is there anyone in this session that was not in the previous session that we had roughly 1 month ago? Can we have someone shouting out in the chat if they weren't? Okay. So the video is available. Okay, quite some people. The video for the other chat is available, and we can post it on the chat, or we'll send a follow-up with that link to that video. It was similar to this one. It was a lot of content in a very short amount of time, but you might want to look into that to see, thanks Rhonda, to get the basics. So don't worry if you don't catch everything today. Try to listen in, watch the other video, and then watch this video again, and then it will make more sense. So in terms of FHIR implementation, this is one diagram that depicts what can be considered when we talk about FHIR implementation. So FHIR is a standard that covers not only the technical format for the files, it covers the data models, the information models if we want. It covers the terminology aspects of this. It covers the parts of technical transport, like is it RESTful, is it SOAP. It covers architectural things like searching, operations. It covers a bit of support for implementation. In this session today, we are going to see how all of that is put at the service of specific user goals, like our own national profiles or our own national flavor of FHIR, or our own project of FHIR implementation. So what we are going to do is going to be based on always the same mechanisms. So when we use FHIR in an implementation, FHIR is structured in a way that allows us to be compliant with FHIR, even if we slightly have to deviate from FHIR. The thing is that we deviate in a standard way, or we deviate in a controllable way. We don't need to invent specific data formats or specific data extensions and if everyone doing it their own way, but there is conformance to that. So FHIR also defines the ways of deviating from the core. And one way of showing this is this multi-layered diagram here. We have the FHIR-based specification, which contains some extensions and to which we can add some extensions. Now let's see a realistic implementation. We can have HL7 guidance, IHE profiles, OpenHIE guides. We have several institutions, WHO, so there are several institutions working towards making implementations based on FHIR. Because, for example, in the case of HL7 or IHE or OpenHIE, what comes out of the box is good, is general purpose, but for this purpose, we want to provide additional guidance, for example, about security or about the other things that we will see today. We'll create examples of what those layers are about. And for example, the case of prescription, if two people use FHIR differently for expressing a prescription, then we have an interoperability problem. So there are standards that apply globally, and those standards help by putting some constraints or some better defined boundaries between across what FHIR can do. So FHIR is very flexible. We can do pretty much everything because it is very flexible. It's extendable. It's extensible. So if it's extensible, we can do pretty much everything that we want. There is a project for controlling coffee machines with a FHIR interface, just for fun. But you can really do everything with it. It's just a generic interface, of course, appropriate for healthcare. But it's too generic, so two people can have different ideas of how to implement the same thing. So we start adding constraints. So there are global constraints like HL7 guides, IHE profiles, OpenHIE guides. Those things, they are profiles on FHIR, and they say, well, you can do everything, but for this use case, you should do this. And then you can have, on top of that, you can have national guidance. You can say, in this country, you must use this vocabulary, so these code sets. In this country, the patient gender is mandatory, or in this country, the last name is always mandatory to fill in for a patient, or the prescription code must be from one of those value sets, or the prescription name, the prescribed product name is always mandatory. These are things that do not belong in global guidance because different countries will have different things. For example, the notion of a family name will differ whether it's first name or last name, depending on which country we are in. So that's the global standards. They can define some things, but the national standards, they can always add to this. And finally, sometimes we do it, or many times we do it, we add project specifications. So we can say, I want to make a system like a mobile app. I want this mobile app to be communicating with the rest of the FHIR systems, but my specification has specific things to this. It has specific constraints to this that only matter to me, but still I can document this in a good way. And we will see in a future session what the advantages and how to do that documentation. But if I capture my project specifications, then I can pretty much guarantee that if this sits on top of that, then they are all conformant all the way down. This is much better than having, for example, two people using the FHIR-based specification in completely different realm, or in the same realm, but in completely different ways, which would cause interoperability issues. So, and this comes down to any FHIR specification adds constraints and extensions to the one it depends on. So if we say I'm based on the FHIR base, I can add constraints to that. We'll see how to add those constraints, but it's pretty much this kind of layered structure that I would like you to retain. So why do we do, so please let me know if I'm going too fast, too slow. When I hear myself, I always think I'm going too fast, but I cannot really avoid that unless I get some feedback.
It looks like you might have a question.
Okay.
Bhavna, I see your hand up.
No questions?
No questions, keep going.
Okay. Okay, so knowing that FHIR allows, FHIR profiling allows you to exactly to do this this adaptation of the underlying specification. So you can choose any base. Your base can be the bottom base, which is the FHIR base, or it can be your national implementation if you have one. So you can sit on top of those bases and say, I'm going to profile this even further. So it does, you take what you have out of the box, that's what I meant before, and you make a slightly different box, you make a slightly different flavor of this. So one thing that's very important is the purpose. What do you want to do? Do you want to have your system compliant with FHIR, or do you want to define specifications for several systems to work? Because if you want to do with your system, you can pretty much do what you want. You don't have to engage with anyone. You just engage with your stakeholders, with your immediate stakeholders, and then say, well, this is how my system works. But then it's not really interoperable because you always have to negotiate with others. So, but if it's just between one hospital and one specific application, you could say, I'm going to use FHIR on this protocol that I will establish with this pharmacy or with this hospital or with this app vendor. As long as that is clear, that is okay. And this is very important because of the second bullet point that I have there. Once you apply a constraint, once you say, for example, let me give an example. The person's last name shall always be in uppercase. This is not uncommon in French-speaking countries, and you can do these things. You could put such a constraint in a FHIR profile, but the moment that you cross the border to a non-French-speaking place, then that will already be broken. And for this, there is a principle that I don't remember the name now, but it's a principle of being flexible with what you accept. So be tolerant with what you accept, but be strict with what you send out. So try to, as much as possible, be very strict with your contribution, because if you know that if the other party is at least a bit more, or is as strict as you are, or a bit more flexible than you, then it shall be okay. But if you have the opposite, if the receiving party is more strict than the sending party, then the message will not pass. And this has a real life impact, which is if you should avoid. Yeah, you should avoid that. You should avoid systems to become non-compliant because of ideal constraints. For example, if you say uppercase and no accents in the last name, that's okay. But the first patient that comes with a name that has a special character, then that patient will be rejected by the system, and the system would become non-compliant, or that patient will become non-compliant because you thought, well, this seemed a good idea at the time, but in practice, we are breaking everything for this patient from now on. So try to be too strict in your layers, or always see which layer you're in. If you're in your own system, you control your universe. If not, be careful with being a bit too strict. And the profiling, what you do is to transport your functional constraints and technical sometimes to the technical specifications. That's what we are going to do today, but this is making sure that we have the transition between the functional part and the technical part. So FHIR profiling is a technical profiling, and as a technical activity, it should depend on, or should be subordinate to, functional requirements or strategical requirements that we might have. Sometimes we have technical requirements like platform requirements that we also have to reflect, but keep in mind that what you're doing, is it for myself or for others, and where are those requirements? That's the most important thing. Questions on this so far? No questions? Okay. So the FHIR base.
Jose?
Yep.
Carl here. Can I ask a question? Do you start with resources, or do you start with profiles?
You start with, I hope to answer that question in the next half an hour or so, but normally you would start with the resources that you have. Ideally, you should start with a model of what your data should mean, like a logical model, and then try to map that to the resources. And if they don't fit, then you create a profile.
Oh, so I thought a logical model is a profile.
No, the logical model, well, it can be represented as such, but it's not. A logical model is not a FHIR profile. Technically, no, let me say no. the logical model is a higher level representation of the information that can be transposed into a technical profile. Today, the profiles that we're talking about, they are technical profiles. I think an example would make it quite clear, and I will be glad to show it.
Jose, we have one more question. Can you say something about IHE? What is the license type?
If you are asking, so Nirmal, if you ask what is the license type to use IHE materials are open for the community. Everyone can use them. To claim conformance to IHE, there's internal rules, which is you have to go to a connectathon in order you do declare yourself conformant to IHE. But everything that we are mentioning here, they are open standards. IHE, HL7, OpenHIE, they're all open standards. So no license issues whatsoever. I hope that answers the question. Good. Okay. So the FHIR resources. FHIR provides a bunch of resources, and many resources, 100 and something resources that we use. Those resources will be like things like patient, medication request, medication, observation, device. So those encounter. So those things, they are the atomic information or data objects that we might need to exchange. Normally, in most circumstances, those are the things that we exchange, which means that you don't have, so if the patient contains the patient age and the patient marital status and the patient names, you send the whole, if you know the whole thing, you send the whole thing at once. You don't send first the marital status and then the name. So those are the atomic units of exchange. To do that and to become a standard, the FHIR could not try to have one flavor that would fit out of the box for everyone. So FHIR resources in any given version, so we are now in version 4, they represent the up-to-date, commonly agreed data sets for exchange. So in human language, for example, the patient resource today represents what has been agreed that is relevant for 80% of the cases that would need to do this in a standard way. So we expect that everything that's on the patient resource is something that 80% of the systems would benefit by doing it in the same way. So for example, let me continue using the name. In FHIR, we don't have first name and last name. We have family name and given name, because in Asian cultures, the concept of first name and last name would mean something different than what it means in Europe, for example. So the FHIR provides those things that the groups define. These, if you want to exchange patient names, this is how you do it. So these are things that are standardized. Leaving the rest, the other 20%, I mean, it's never a figure, it's just a rule of thumb. Leaving the other things that are tricky, they are not standardizable, or we haven't figured out a way to standardize yet, leave those out exactly for profiling. And profiling means that if you need something in your implementation that needs to be done, that is not in the standard, you can either constrain it. For example, if you say, well, I don't need the given name because that will be a privacy issue here. I'm just making this up. This is not a realistic story, I hope. But if someone says we don't want to use the middle name, or we don't want to use the given name, then we can say, good, then in my country or in this system, we remove the possibility for anyone to enter the given name. We can do that. So we can add constraints into FHIR. We can say, out of this object, we only use this part of the object, or out of these values, we only use these values. Those are the ones for us. And it works like this. So let me introduce one key aspect here, which is FHIR does work by saying, this is what you have out of the box. With this, you can make it shorter. That's why the previous diagram was in pyramid. You can make it shorter. You can make it more focused, more constrained. If what you're doing doesn't fit, then you add an extension. So on one hand, you can do constraints. On the other hand, you can do extensions. And that is why it's very important to be quite liberal in when you profile something that others will need, because you know that they can add their own constraints. You know that they can add their own extensions. What you don't want is that they need to add extensions because you were too strict into something that you decided. For example, we have a patient gender in FHIR. Patient gender is, if I'm not mistaken, male, female, unknown, and other. So there is no provision for gender identities, which is fine because we are talking about the biological gender. assuming that that is that is within the 80% of agreement that is relevant for clinical systems today. But if you want to have the social gender or the gender identity of a person, we are telling people this has to be an extension, because those value sets, they cannot be changed, because if they are changed, then everyone will have their own values. So we are saying, if your requirements don't fit in here, so if you want, for example, to have a social gender, you need to add an extension, because some things can be constrained, some things cannot. So you can only constrain, sorry, you can never extend the core of FHIR. We will see some examples as we get there. The other thing that might be interesting, and this is mostly just for awareness, we will not do FHIR workflow profiling today, but I just wanted to be aware. FHIR workflow, it's a module in FHIR. It defines the foundations for handling a workflow. For example, a prescription is a request. A dispense is an event. So there's something that you request from someone and something that happens. An observation, for example, is an event. The fact that you have a plan, that implies a request as well. So we put things into kind of smaller boxes because it helps us plan the workflows. For example, the question that we have very often, when we say, when you give a dispense, the prescription is complete. That is actually not true. When you issue a dispense for medication, the prescription is not complete. The prescription is just the request to do something, and that request stays exactly as it is. The workflow may become complete, but in other places, the workflow is only complete when the patient actually takes the medication, or when they visit the doctor after taking the medication. So in order to try to solve those problems, we started having some guidelines about workflows. For example, creating notions of requests, dispenses, etc. So this creates some expectations about what to do, how to exchange it. We'll see the way to use it in FHIR in the next few slides, which is actually this one. So this is also for awareness. We will not do profiling, I think, today of any of these mechanisms. You could. Everything in FHIR can be profiled, let's say. But FHIR provides basic mechanisms for exchanging data. REST, which most of us are going to start with, I guess. So RESTful API, the normal get something from a server, post something on a server, update something on a server, and delete something from a server. So this is the basic interactions that we have in REST. We can also have FHIR working in a messaging approach. Messaging approach is how do you say? It's a legacy from the approach that was followed in HL7 version 2, a prior approach, which is, instead of saying this is the server, it contains the information, everyone can get it. It's more of a point-to-point in the sense that it says, System A tells to System B, do this, or I expect this, or I need that. So that's more of a messaging. It's really one-to-one. It's not really intended for broadcasting. Sometimes it's used as broadcasting, but that's a different thing. Documents is a broadcasting, but not of one resource at a time. It's just, hey, here's the document of the patient, like it's the patient summary. If someone needs it, they can get it, but they get it as a whole. So that's a document. There's subscriptions, which would be, for example, like you have in your podcasts and your RSF feeds, which is whenever something happens, or whenever, for example, a patient is readmitted for the same conditions in this hospital after less than 30 days, please signal, because this might mean that we did not do a good job before. So FHIR enables also these subscriptions. The Da Vinci Health Record Exchange Implementation Guide, which is one of those layers built on top of FHIR, provides some good references to this. And all of these can be done using different base FHIR constructs. So FHIR provides the base for you to do any of these. It's just important to know that when you're profiling, you might be profiling not only the content, but how that content is exchanged. You might say, I want to use a message, or I want to use a document, or I just want to use plain REST. For today, we will not have any practical examples of any of those, just for you to realize that this is an important decision that you have to make, which is actually sometimes very important. Sometimes we need to exchange messages between, so your stakeholders say we need to exchange messages between these two systems. And one of the most important questions is this one-to-one? Is it a broadcast? And you have to consider those as well. Another thing that FHIR has is the notion of terminologies. From the previous session, I will not go long on this. When we have a data element in FHIR, those data elements, if they are coded, they are associated with a value set. Value sets, they get codes from code systems, and some elements, they are identifiers, and the identifiers are associated with naming systems. All of those words that are underlined here, they are FHIR resources, which means that when we define an element, or when we define a value set, or when we define a code system or a naming system, we are doing that in a FHIR way. And this is what we call profiling. So profiling of FHIR is creating the constraints, the extensions, the value sets in a FHIR language so that the system behaves in a predictable way. So that if you say the codes for gender identity, they are male, female, doesn't matter, transgender, male to female, transgender, female to male. If you do that in a FHIR language or in a FHIR technical mechanism, and then you put that on your server, and your server behaves exactly the same way as it would with the out-of-the-box value sets. The behavior is always the same thing. This puts all the emphasis in the profiling. So that's why profiling is a very important part of FHIR, because it's what allows you to have documentation that is technically understandable the same way by everyone, and not big PDF documents that require lots of interpretation. Actually, I meant to make this point sooner. I didn't, apologies. Very important part of FHIR profiling is that most of it is computable, so you don't end up with 200 pages of specifications which no one reads, and even if they do, they never interpret in the same way. So the FHIR resource profiles, as I was just mentioning, we can add extensions, we can constrain the resources, we can change the cardinalities, we can change the vocabulary bindings, we can change the value sets, and we can create slices, and there's a few more things that we can do. But today we would focus on these: adding extensions, constraining the data elements, constraining the cardinality. So if something is, we accept the person to have many many given names, for example, this is the case, we can say we don't want to have many given names, we just want to have one given name. We can do that in FHIR. The same thing with the value sets. If the value set for allergies is this big or is anything, we can say, no, in this country or in this system, we only want the allergies to be these 14 codes or these 200 codes, depends on what you do. And then finally, just some words about the implementation support that we have. Oh, actually, I think I put that in the other slides. Did I miss a slide? I don't think so. I think it's further ahead. The implementation, maybe it will come later, apologies. The implementation is that after you do all those things, after you do the profiling, there is some mechanisms to help, for you to help support other implementers. So there are some things that we can do. For example, adding testing, adding examples, adding some conformance validation instruments there. Maybe upfront adding the logical models to say this is what the data looks like, so that a doctor looks at this and they understand it without having to be a clinician. There are things in FHIR that also support the implementation side and the modeling thing. So things that are not strictly in the technical profiling scope. And with this, yeah, I would move to the how-to, but I would get some sips of tea and I would ask for questions. Questions, feedback? Too much, too little, too slow, too confusing? Any feedback is appreciated. Thank you. I just need to catch my breath for a few seconds, so feel free to ask questions. No questions?
I think the speed was fine, was good. I just have one question. You mentioned the extension and the restriction of resources, but I don't know an example where this would be necessary, but would it also be possible to create your own resource?
There is a provision for that with a lot of caveats, which is if you do that, you are requiring the other person to have the same understanding of the custom resource that you have, which is why it's normally something that we don't expect. Because if you have a need to do this on your own project, well, in your own project, you can do pretty much whatever you want. If you have the need, however, to do this at the national level, for example, this means most likely that either you're missing something or HL7 FHIR is missing something, which is also, it's also possible that it happens. So I just have to give this, this yellow flag, like it is possible. It's not something that we encourage a lot, just because whenever you do it, you're deviating from the standard, and that means that either the standard is incomplete or you're asking something that maybe it's not the best way of shaping your data. Do you have an example?
No, I don't have an example. I was just wondering.
Okay.
But thank you.
It will be one of the slides, just what to do in that case.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so how is different FHIR terminology from other ontologies and terminology repositories such as BioPortal? I do not know BioPortal, apologies. FHIR is a technical data exchange format and provides some terminology support. It's not an ontology. It is so an ontology in the sense that it would be a thorough or comprehensive information model. FHIR is on the technical model. So when we say the patient has, so the FHIR patient has a given name and the family name, maybe there's an ontology behind this. Maybe there's two things saying, well, these two are names and these, but one is family name, the other one is given name. Maybe there's also middle name, and all those are names and all those are designators. FHIR doesn't do that. FHIR just sticks to the technical implementation of this. Does that work, test fit, for your as an answer for you?
I'm gonna go with a yes. We've got one in the Google Doc. What comes first in FHIR, resource or profile?
I think that was a question from Carl. Yeah, we will start with the we'll see that in the example, but we will start with the resources. The FHIR is, so the FHIR profile is an adaptation of an existing base, and that base would be normally the resource. So we build profiles on top of profiles on top of profiles, and all of those, they are on the base of the FHIR resources. We will see an example when we get to the hands-on. So, how to do it? First, a very brief overview of the kind of process that you might want to have in mind. So you don't have to do it. So you don't have to have a strict process for profiling. Although if you start becoming serious about this, you will really benefit from this. In the sense that first look at use cases. If you don't know your use cases, you know, as most of you that are designers will know, that you will be just spinning around and not knowing whether things are complete or not because you don't know what use cases you are using this for. This means functional examples. So try to get from your stakeholders, from the doctors, from the program managers, from those people, what is it that we want to do? We'll get a bit more detail in a second, the next slides. Then the next thing will be try to figure out what exchange method we are looking at. Are we talking about REST documents? So this is more of a technical thing, but you can already provide some input there. Well, am I talking about broadcasting, or am I talking about point-to-point, or am I talking about some mobile app that needs the information whenever it is at any moment? So try to think of the exchange methods mostly on a functional level, but looking at the technical part of it. Then once you say, so let's start with an example. Someone says we need a COVID vaccine prescription. Let's say in a few, well, for now, let's say that in order to get vaccinated, let me just start with the yellow fever vaccine. In order to get yellow fever vaccine in many countries, you need a prescription for that, because That's not something that you just have in your national program. You need a prescription. So the first thing is that someone says we need someone to request the so we need a physician to make a request for a patient to have a vaccine. Good, that's the use case. That will be the boundary for everything that we do further ahead. If we need to extend use cases, we can always go back, but we have to keep in mind that if we change use cases, we are going back to the beginning of the loop. Maybe the outcome is that we can do the 2 use cases with the same profile. Maybe there's a risk that if we add a use case at a late stage, then we have to review our whole profiles because the scope has changed. But most of you are already familiar with the notion of adding scope, like use cases, during a specification. So if we say that, well, the doctor needs to have a prescription and the pharmacy must receive it, in that case, maybe what you want to do, and this is the discussion that you would have with your stakeholders, you say, well, the doctor submits it to a central repository, and there it becomes available for the pharmacist, because we don't know which pharmacy the patient is going to choose, or we don't know where the patient will be tomorrow. And the doctor will shut down their computers at the end of the day. So the doctor cannot send it to a specific pharmacy. The doctor will have to put it available somewhere on his system or on the other systems. We don't know. So maybe in that case, we are talking about either a REST or a document approach, because a messaging approach is no longer possible, because you cannot put the one-to-one if you don't know who the other one is. You know the doctor, but you don't know which pharmacy. So this is the kind of reasoning that will go behind this. And of course, this discussion will be much richer than that. I'm just giving some thread. Then the functional data models, they are simply the statement of, if we want to have a description of the, so if you want to have a prescription, sorry, what should be in the prescription? Well, obviously the patient name, the patient identification, and the identification of the vaccine. Which, if you're in a given country, you just use the vaccine code and that's it. So these will be the data elements that you start with, and then you say, well, do I need to put the patient name and the ID? Maybe you do, because it's if something goes wrong with the ID verification, then at least you have the name. Should we put the date of birth, because that's commonly used to distinguish between patients that have very similar names or exactly the same name? Well, maybe you do that, and then you enter those discussions. Do you put more information, less information? You discuss this with your doctors, let's say, with your functional analysts, and once you do that, you have a rough idea of your functional data model. By the way, this is something that you can do. You can capture this in a logical model, as I was mentioning before. So all of this is before profiles. But once you do that, once you say, this is the data that I need, you can consolidate it in a model. You can consolidate it in a spreadsheet or on a PDF. You can consolidate it anywhere. But that will help you because then the rest is, then you can tell your stakeholders, your clinical stakeholders, say, okay, guys, we don't need you anymore. Now it's a technical thing. And then you dive into the technical implementation. And then the profiling starts. Profiling is pretty much the following. Choose a base. So if you are working in, for example, a project, a regional implementation in Belgium for doing some profiles, you would not, most likely you would not use the FHIR as a base. You would use the Belgian profiles as the base, because they already have some of the things that you might need about names, about the patient status, about the types of identifiers of patients and of products. You can have those. So choose the base. So choose which level you're in that pyramid, so that you see, I want to profile based on these things, because I know that I'm saving, first of all, I'm saving effort. And I know that all of the people that I want to exchange data with, they will also have it from the same base. So I don't need to bother maintaining that base. And I can expect those people those other people to be compliant with my system. So then you create the resource profile. So first the resources, then you create the profiles as we need. The profiles, we'll see, it's really adding extensions and constraints. That's it. We add vocabularies, so we add the codes. And I always recommend to add examples. Why? Because you're at the end of the loop, but you're not really at the end. You're now at the point that you can go back to your stakeholders and say, hey, this is an example of a prescription. the prescription for yellow fever would look like this. Does this fit your use case? Yes or no? This is an excellent opportunity for validation. So it's really the V model. So if at the end of the V, if you have again your examples that you can face confront your stakeholders to say, does this work as intended? That's a really good opportunity, and I could not recommend it more. So let me see. In terms of process, yeah, let's look a bit on the details, but just I have a question here from Carl. Functional data model equal to technical specifications? No, the functional data model is the abstract thing. So let me give one example. The functional data model is the fact that, for example, the patient has a gender and a gender identity. As a doctor, that's what you say. These are two different things. One thing is the biological gender. Again, not making any statements what to define either. I'm not a clinician, but as a doctor, you can say, I want to have a differentiation between the clinical, so the biological gender and the gender identity, because those are different. That's what you discuss with the clinicians, and that's what you capture. And they can say, well, I have then for biological gender, I have these 3 values, and for gender identity, I have these 15 values, or in other countries, I have an infinite number of possibilities. That's fine. But this is what the doctors say. That's the functional data model. In FHIR, this would mean that you use the patient gender attribute to have the biological gender, and you need an extension, which is the gender identity, or I think social gender or something like this. That's an extension. So the fact that you use this attribute in FHIR and an extension, this is the technical implementation or the technical specification. The functional data model is the model that basically says, this is the data that has to be implemented. I don't care how. I mean, talking as a doctor, I don't care how. I need the gender and the gender identity. This is what we need. And we can work on that. That I can give some examples from Belgian examples if you want. The physical implementation is really what goes over the wire, which can be in very complicated or less complicated FHIR JSON formats or XML formats, but that's not the same thing that we are discussing. The logical model is the abstraction of the data. I will give an example of a logical model. Is that okay, Carl? I'm just seeing the discussion. So use cases, also to catching up with time. We are halfway through, so we have quite still a few things to do, and I want to have time for some examples. So the use cases. These are just ideas for you to conduct that process. First, identify what your data exchange process is like. And the trick I can mention here is, it really helps to imagine dialogue. So imagine that if you want to have exchange of data between two parties, to me, it really helps to say, what would I as person 1 say to the person 2? I say, hey, I need a medication. That's one thing. That's one way of saying it. The other one of saying it is that, hey, I need you to give me that medication. You see, this kind of dialogue, if you imagine it, that it will contain the nuances that you need to capture eventually. So if you say, I need you to give me that medication, you're implying a different behavior to say, hey, I need a medication. I don't care who provides it. Those are different things. So it really helps to say, I need a medication, and it has to be for yellow fever, and it is for this patient, but make sure that he takes it no later than tomorrow, something like this. These are the things that try to imagine a normal, human dialogue. It really helps to frame the problem. Doing this, you start listing the actors. You say, oh, okay, for this I have the guy that makes the prescriptions and the person that receives the prescriptions, and you have start to identify. Okay, I have one entity that is going to receive the prescriptions and is going to dispense it. That's fine. Or is it the person that receives the prescriptions the same person that dispenses it? Well, if you have an automated dispensing system, then maybe the person that reads the prescription, they have to send another message to the system that actually dispenses it. But then you start doing this analysis. You start making your functional architecture of the system. And in this phase, in the very first phase of these dialogues, of these things, when you are sitting at the table with the physicians and healthcare professionals, try to capture examples. Try to say, okay, we are going to take the COVID vaccine, or we are going to take the yellow fever vaccine as examples. And then you say, in a few weeks, we will meet again, and we will give you a FHIR profile with one example of a yellow fever, and you have to validate if this is okay. So this is the first step try to identify who is saying what to whom, and try to come up with examples. They really help. Second thing is the exchange method. So you have to define things like, is it a broadcast? So do I say, here's a prescription, I don't care who dispenses it, but I need it dispensed? Or do you say, I need you to do something for me? You have to say who initiates the communication. Is it because, for example, once you put the prescription in a server, it's not the server just holds the data. It's going to be the pharmacy that initiates the pulling of data from the server. So after you decide this model of exchanging data, you also look at the question of, if someone gets a prescription, do they need to get the whole thing at once? So the patient, keep in mind that patient, so the resources are the atomic unit of exchange. So a prescription will be one patient resource, one request, one medication request resource, and one medication resource. Suppose that the prescription contains only those 3 resources. That's your prescription, but it contains those 3 resources. Do you want to get them one by one? Or do you want to have them to be updated separately? Or do you want to say, if someone changes something to the medication, the prescription is no longer valid because the code for yellow fever is no longer active, something like this. So you might want to say, do I want to ensure that my data is consistent across resources? For example, if the prescription mentions the yellow fever resource, do I want to put those 2 together in a way that they can only be exchanged together? Or do I want to let that to the server? Those are discussions that you'll have. And in this link that I have here, let me just start opening this. The link that I have here. Okay, thank you. It shows a nice big diagram of lots of things. Let me just close. Nice diagram of things that you should look up. So keep that link for reference. And it has a very big diagram of things that you should look at. So is it the direct connection? Yes or no? Is it who initiates oh, I presume you can still hear me, right? I had the same issue. I had the same issue as I had the other time. So my Zoom controls are no longer working. I'll hold on until the next break, and then you can see my screen, right?
We can see your screen.
Thank you. So this diagram provides you an initial guidance of who initiates the communication. Do you want to persist the information together, or do you want it in atomical formats? All those things. So there's several questions to this, and you might want to look at this implementation guide to do this. So here's an example of an implementation guide based on FHIR. So all of these things, they are FHIR, but they are already oriented to specific uses of information. So you can look at this for deciding or for helping decide how to exchange your data. So the question on functional data models. Let me give an example now. I did not have it prepared, so apologies. I'll have to look it up. So, sorry for this. So a logical model, let me just, the purpose of a logical model is for you to say, this is what my data is about. Let me give an example of a logical model for vaccination. And I'll compare this with the profile. And I think this might make sense also to explain the other question that you had, Carl, about the resources versus profiles. As soon as it opens, So the logical model for the vaccination, this is the information that you get from the stakeholders, and you say, hey, what is in a vaccination? We say, well, each vaccination entry, so we are only talking about the message that the nurse sends out to the server once they injected someone with a vaccine. That's nothing else. It's not the vaccination certificate. So I'm really not talking about that. So I don't want to make any confusion with that. Just the vaccination event. a vaccination event, because it's a unique event, it is good if it has a unique identifier so that we can track it to see, well, this went wrong. I need to go back to the event. I need to see what happened there. So it has a unique identifier just to be somewhere on a server. It has a status, like, is this already done or not done? Or was this wrong entry? It has a status reason, like, if this was not done, why was this not done? So, and everything that I'm saying is not technical, although it's represented in a FHIR-looking way. These are the discussions that we had with the clinical stakeholders. Of course, it has to have a patient. It has to point to a patient, but it's a reference to a patient. It's not just a patient ID. It's a reference to the resource that contains the patient, and it has the code of the vaccine. It has the date of the vaccination, and it has the request. So it has a pointer to a prescription if a prescription exists. And for example, you see here that the prescription, the vaccination request is 0 to 1, which would mean that this is the optional prescription. So if you have a prescription, you put it here. If you don't have it, you don't bother. If the vaccine is done because of a protocol, then you have a protocol, again, optional. And then we have a type of vaccine if you want to have, this is the first dose, etc. So these discussions are discussions that you have with the clinicians. This is the model that you capture functionally. This is what the data means. Then, and after you capture that, you say, well, for this to work in FHIR, because, for example, the administered product is something that we know we need. So we know that we need the code for COVID, but one thing is the code for COVID. The other thing is the code for AstraZeneca, Pfizer, and all those things. So we need different attributes for that. Good. Then let's see what happens. And then we have to create extensions. So these are extensions. So this is the prescription. So the original order is the prescription. I'm just showing this as extensions. We don't have to worry yet about how this gets there. But yeah, the administered product, the location of the vaccine, these are things that did not exist in the base profile. So we are now adding this to the base profile as extensions. So when we make a profile, we take the immunization. Actually, let me also show you the base resource for this. Actually, let me take you to the vaccine code as a concrete example of how do we do this. Someone says we need the vaccine code, that's one thing, and we need the administered product, and we consider those separate things. If your stakeholders decide that,
It looks like we lost Jose. We will give him a few seconds to come back. Maybe a minute or two. Sorry about that, everyone. Unexpected.
Okay.
While we wait, though, I will certainly let you know that we will be doing a Fireside Chat on June 18th. These are open, unstructured sessions for you to come and ask questions. So if you want to register, they're at 9 a.m. ET, 3 a.m. South Africa time. Please do come join us and we can answer more questions. We'll keep giving Josie a second. Sorry about this, everyone. So as you guys are learning a little bit more about FHIR, do you have thoughts on other webinars that you'd like to see? Are there specific topics that you're interested in that you'd like us to cover? Do you have any questions, any feedback? We'd love to hear from you while we wait. Feel free to come off mute, guys.
I think it will be good. Yeah, as we're learning about FHIR, maybe we also at some point learn about HL7, because I think it's more continuation of FHIR.
Okay. Just a continuation on FHIR, yeah. So we're going to do 4 of these foundational series and then plan to do a year-long series on FHIR. So anything specific within continuing on FHIR? Eden?
Someone just reached out to me 2 weeks ago about, yes, I understand FHIR, I understand the resources, etc., but concretely, I don't know how to implement FHIR. So maybe giving some concrete use case or just like some sessions, interactive sessions with the audience. So we can create different groups and like you will be responsible for the patient resources. For this group, you are responsible for the health facility resource. And after we can see how we can create some interactive health information exchange profile. It will be very helpful for the community.
Awesome, thank you, Magat. And I see Belgian profiling, real design and implementing experience step by step. Okay, so that sounds like it's everyone's looking for a place to have some real live examples to dig through. That's great.
Yeah, I think the other thing is in Tanzania, we did the enterprise architecture, Tanzania Health Enterprise Architecture, and one of the standards, medical record exchange. So what as part of the next steps was to assess the information system to see if they are fine. We really need a capacity of defined, yes.
You're going in and out for me, so I'm going to try and repeat that back.
Some claim they've used FHIR, but actually the capacity how to actually assess and see if this particular system is FHIR compliant or not.
Eden, I didn't catch very much, but I think I heard in Tanzania you had the
and how is it has been.
Eden, I'm going to ask that you put that suggestion in the Google Doc. I'm going to send it again. We're having a hard time hearing you.
Yeah. Can I make a comment?
Please.
Yeah, so I also like now I think for the FHIR, we may have a lot of theoretical experience, but not much in a hands-on experience. So it is, if it is possible, we would like to see some kind of a sandbox where everybody can join in and play and see how to integrate with happy servers and all those stuff. So it is, so I would like to suggest if you can go for some sandbox, something like that to play with that. Thank you.
Okay.
My apologies. I was kicked out of the room and I did not know this.
Well, welcome back.
I will catch up with the chat in a few seconds. Am I interrupting, or should I just continue from where I left, or I think I left?
I'm getting some great suggestions on future ideas, but please jump in. We'll
okay. So yeah, so the sequence would be start with a logical model, look at what happens in the base profile, and then add the constraints or extensions that you need. This is it. There's a technical way of doing that, and I want to get my hands dirty with this with you on this on the way of doing this. And for this, we need to go further into the theory of doing that. So if I may continue, let me see, where's the presentation mode? Oh, here. Can you see my, oh, you cannot see my screen, right?
No, we can't.
Okay, so it should be showing up soon while I put this in presenter mode. Wrong button. So we were looking at the process. I was showing the logical model, then the profiles, and then add something to the profiles. Logical models, base resources, and then add something to the base resources to make it your flavor. That's profiling, that's what it means. And then, yeah, and then that's pretty much the entry to our technical specification. So let's see how we do this, or how technically it works. Oh, sorry, my screen is duplicate here. I need to close this for a second and reopen it. Well, okay. As of the point that you have your functional data needs, you can go into the technical implementation. So the technical implementation is pretty much choosing what you want to do. So a bit of recap of the theory, 20 seconds. In FHIR, so this is in the previous session. FHIR has a very modular approach to things. So everything is built upon something else, which means that you can reuse the same mechanisms all over. And this is to say that most everything in FHIR can be extended because you have here. So every time that you have a domain resource, which is all the resources that we use, they can have extensions. And every element in FHIR, so every data element in FHIR can have extensions. And since the data type is a derivative of an element, you can extend elements, but you can also extend data type. So you can have a string, or you can have a composite string, or whatever. You can have a date, or you can have a date with a special format. Well, maybe not a date with a special format because that's already supported. But pretty much everything in FHIR is extensible, which is exactly what we will see how it works. And that's how we do FHIR extensions. The profiling is, as I said, terminology, extensions, and constraints. If we start with that, then we are already going quite far. So everything that you need to know about profiling FHIR is on this page. I'm pointing to the latest page, build.fhir.org/profiling. So this is the upcoming version of FHIR, or the current development version of FHIR. Everything that you need to do, all the bases, all the technical bases that we will mention today. So how to do this, etc. The theory behind it is explained there. Profiling in FHIR is a technical based mechanism. We will see that. We will work with some examples. We can do some narrative when profiling FHIR, but that's just to explain from a human perspective. Most of profiling FHIR is technical based mechanism. As you've seen, the extensions, reducing the cardinalities, those are technical based mechanisms, which means that you don't need someone to interpret that. That thing is done technically so that a computer can understand it, which is very important, because then if a computer can understand it, your server knows if your message is conformant or not, because the computer does not need to interpret text. It catches the technical constraints. So technically, a profile is the name that we give to a constrained resource in FHIR. So if we have a FHIR resource, we can have a profile. A very simple example would be a thing that we might want to call the medication prescription. If we look at FHIR, there is no resource called medication prescription. There is a thing called medication request, which is fine because we can use a medication request for a prescription, whatever prescription means in a given context. It might differ from country to country, or if you're in a hospital or not in a hospital. So the prescription is already one slightly changed flavor of a broader understanding what is a medication request. So for example, if I have a mobile application that tells me to remind me to take my medication at 8 a.m., I can see that that's also a medication request, but I really cannot see that as a prescription. So medication request is what we have in FHIR. Medication prescription would be a profile. Most profiles are for existing resources, so we typically only profile the existing resources that they are. We can do new or custom resources, but if you do think one is needed, just let the community know. You can do this with a FHIR basic resource. So there is a resource that's specially dedicated to that, so that even if you do custom resources, you don't fall out of the conformity space. The key element to making FHIR profiles, and now is the time for telling if things are going fast, too fast, or they are clear. The key thing to FHIR profiling is structure definition and element definitions. So when we define a profile by adding extensions, by reducing the cardinalities, etc., what we are doing is changing the structure of the data. And to make it computable in FHIR, there is a FHIR resource. So it's kind of a foundational resource. It's not a clinical resource. It's a foundational resource, that is called structure definition. Structure definition really defines this is the data structure that we want. And it has a couple of things like FHIR versions, jurisdiction, etc. Those are all metadata. The juicy bit, the part that really matters, is the content. And the content can be done, I will show it, in a snapshot or differential approach. Let me take the example of a patient. If we want to profile a patient and we just want to say, this patient is exactly the same as the base patient, but it has the mandatory date of birth, for example. If we want to make it mandatory, then the structure definition is the FHIR way of doing this. Don't see this as a resource, but is the FHIR way of saying, I want to create my own patient resource that is based on the FHIR patient resource, but makes the date of birth mandatory. So the structure definition simply has to say, this new patient resource is exactly the same as the base, but with one differential, which is the date of birth becomes mandatory. And this is all together. So the structure definition will contain that, and then the differential will contain one element or more elements, but at least one element, which is this, the patient date of birth is no longer 0 to 1, but it's now 1 to 1, which is mandatory. What I just said is exactly how FHIR works in terms of profiling resources. We take one resource and we say, this is the difference between my resource and the base, and this is in this element or in that element, those are the differences. Is the cardinality or is something else? And that's what we do for profiling. To do that, and you see here the element links to an element definition. The element definition is where the elements are defined. So the elements are defined by saying, what's the type, what is the slicing, we'll check slicings later. We look at what constraints do we have there. Do we have, what is it? Do we have a default value, yes or no? Is there a fixed value? Is there any conditions that we need to put there? What's the cardinality? So there's a min and max. So this is the element definition. So when we say a structure definition defines a set of elements, these are the two mechanisms. So this is the most important thing that we do. The reason that we explore this way is, as I said, to make everything computable. And because I want to go into the examples quickly, I would say the key things that matter is the definitions. So we can change the definition. So we can say my new resource is going to be the same as the patient resource, but is going to change some definitions or some cardinality or some bindings or some constraints or some special flags like must support and is modifier. To do a profiling, yeah, so Marco, do we have an example for when we use snapshot? We don't need to. That's a technical thing that happens behind the scenes. In order for the server to understand it, the server understands snapshots, not differentials, but we don't need to work with snapshots, we work with differentials. I want to bring an example very, very soon, so let me rush through these things because it's better to have an example. So yeah, profiling data structures is like that. Take one resource, add differential constraints and add so constraints and extensions. And the extensions are just make one extension. And there's one key point here, which is everything that you need to know about FHIR extensions, they are here. And whenever you do an extension, make sure that the extension does not exist yet, because if it does exist, you just save yourself some effort. Most important, you saved your stakeholders also some effort, because they will not need to read your interpretation or your opinion about the extensions. So FHIR already provides a lot of extensions. So for example, for the observation, we have many extensions, like what's the device code that was used, what was the reagent that we wanted to use. So these are things that are not part of the 80% that I mentioned, but these are already standard extensions. And if you use one of these, you know that the other party will understand it as well. So let me just try to switch back to my presentation. Okay. I'll just keep in this. So the other thing that we can do is to define terminologies. When we define terminologies, we do two things. We can define the value sets or the code systems on naming systems. For example, we can define value sets based on SNOMED, LOINC, etc. So we just reuse those code systems and we define our own value sets. An example would be the list of allergen substances. That is a value listing code systems because there are surely codes for substances and for products and for allergens. Then we take those, we just create our own value set. So we say, in this country or in this application, we want to use only these 14 codes or these 14 main allergen products. We don't care about if it's the peanut shell or the peanut oil. We just care if it's peanut. So the value sets out of existing code systems. Naming systems is just another resource. And we can say, in this resource, so in my profile, this is the name, this is the value set that I'm going to use. So I will show you one example in a few seconds, but let me just quickly go through the operation definitions and the search parameters. So those are a bit more sidetracked things. We don't usually need them, but just for you to know that if you need to define a server operation, so if you say, hey server, please validate this, or please create a document out of these 5 things, or please show me all the values in this value set, this is something that you typically expect the server to do in an automated way, and FHIR has a way to define those operations. So there is a thing called operation definition, which might become part of your profile if you go a bit more advanced. And that's the way to say we can define or register server operations with operation definition. The other thing is search parameter. Let me take the example of the vaccine and the administered product that we have. As we've seen in the last session, when you do a search on a FHIR resource, on a FHIR server, you can search pretty much on anything that the resource allows. But the extension is something new. It's something that the server does not know. So if you want to say, I want to search my vaccines based on administered product, you cannot, because the base server does not know what is the sorry for this. So the base server does not know what is administered product because it's something new for them. So in that case, we can also provide to the server, so as part of our profile, and we say, this is an extension, and this is a search parameter that covers that extension. So we can say this new profile becomes searchable also on the extensions. So I just wanted to mention that there's a way to do that. And that's also done by a special FHIR mechanism there, which is a search parameter. All of these are FHIR resources. There are tools for that, and that's actually the next thing that I wanted to get. Higher level constraints is what I meant. Do we want to talk documents or messages? Workflow constraints I already mentioned. And there is a bit of a special case for most of you might become interesting is the questionnaire. Questionnaire is just a way to say, I want to capture a lot of information in a structured format, but I don't know yet, or the client doesn't need to know how complex does that map to FHIR resources. For example, if you say the questionnaires that we have when we do an MRI scan, do you have nausea? Do you have claustrophobia? Do you have a current implant? Maybe the nausea would be a condition, maybe the claustrophobia would be another condition, maybe the implant would be a device. But in fact, we don't care about that. We just care about a bunch of checkboxes. So there is a way to capture some information in a way that isolates us from the FHIR, more FHIR complexity. And the questionnaire is kind of a good example there. If you want to know more about questionnaires, there's a lot of information in the SDC implementation guide. So in this link here, and as usual, in the chat.fhir.org. And finally, just to wrap up the process, as I said, try to have examples for everything that you do. If someone says we need an administered product, please ask them, can you give an example where the administered product is different from the vaccine code? If they cannot come up with it, then you know that your requirement is a bit flawed, maybe. If they can come up with it, you can use it to document, to enhance your documentation and to provide examples of what they mean. If you have, at this moment, if you have to do something about workflow and exchange architecture, you just have to do it as text because FHIR does not yet provide lots of features for that. This is the capability statement. If just mentioning briefly, if you look at the server will tell you everything that it supports, including the profiles if you want. It's just something that you might want to do at the end of all your profiling. We say, oh, by
we're not having a lot of luck with Jose today. We'll give him a second, but no. I'd love to keep hearing some thoughts on additional possible webinars. I liked the idea of the sandbox and having some concrete use cases or interactive sessions. We might not be able to get to that today, but hopefully we can plan for that in the future. Yeah, any other thoughts? Huh. Looks like folks are getting disconnected randomly. All right, that's really good to know. Sorry about that, folks, if you've been kicked off. We will look into it and make sure it doesn't happen again. Did anyone else have a problem with Zoom just kicking you off? You just message me in the chat if you did. I'll make sure we fix that problem. So sorry about that. Huh, what an odd thing. Okay. Any other thoughts for possible webinars? So I'm curious. Maybe we can take a second to. Is Jose back on? No. We do have a little bit of a poll to see how you guys are liking these sessions. I'd love to hear any feedback on this one. You know, sans the two disconnections. Are these sessions useful for you? Are you learning what you need to learn? Go ahead and just let us know if you're learning whether these sessions work. You should have had a poll just pop up on your screen. And I'm happy to hear any sort of comments, either in the Google Doc, or if you want to talk to us about ways to improve these sessions.
I'm back, and apologies. I don't know what happened.
We're just taking a quick poll.
Thank you.
Go ahead and, for those of you who want to do it, and feel free to jump back in.
Yeah, meanwhile, I will just prepare the tools for showing, because then it's better to see it than to listen to me talking about this. Tell me when the poll, or should I just go in?
Yep, go ahead and jump in.
Okay. So I'm just going to pick up some random implementation guides that we have, so which contains profiles, and I'm just going to show what is the profile looking like. Let me just pick one up. So for example, this. I need to share, right? Let me share my screen. So I wanted to, while I'm doing this, I'm going to talk about the tools. So there are tools the tools that we use, as I'm going to show now. All of this, they are technical files. So when you do profiling, you are doing technical work. You are defining value sets, you are defining code systems. So you are entering the realm of typing or doing something on a technical basis. There are several ways of doing that. I'm just going to show you how some of these things look like so that you can relate to what we discussed. Because again, this is the first point to discovery. The purpose here is to help you discover. So if I look at the one example of an implementation guide here. So an implementation guide is just a bunch of profiles and narrative and other stuff. If I look at profiles, let me show you what the patient would look like. So the patient, can you read my screen? Sorry, let me ask that first. Can you read what's on my screen?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So Marco, you asked about the snapshot. Snapshot gets very big because the snapshot contains everything. I'm just going to focus on the differential, which is the thing that we want to have. So the differential, let me just look it up. So in this profile, this is just an example. What we have is that, what we say is that the patient has an extension, and that extension is defined in a certain way. It's all in the extensions page that I shared. And the first extension is Nationality Extension. It's defined like this. It has a slice name. So these are all the technical details of this. This is the formal definition of extension. So, and you can see this is an HL7 extension. So you know that everyone will use tendentially the same extension. But what you're saying is that this is my structure definition for my BE patient. This is just an example. And that one uses that one just adds one extension until here. And the extension has the codes and has the values and has the period of nationality. So these are the things that you define in the extension. The other extension is the birthplace. And then you just inherit this extension from its definition here. If I click on this link, I would go there to the official definition of this. So extensions are defined in pretty much the same way as a resource. It's a structure definition that contains a list of elements. That's it. Everything is a list of elements, and the elements are defined in the same way. So if I have the extension birthplace, and then I have the actual elements of my patient resource. For example, patient identifier. I say that the patient identifier has one slice, has another slice. Let me just look at the name and gender. For example, the element gender. So patient. This is what it says. Patient gender has a given comment. So the people that were working on this decided that we need to add a comment here so that whoever reads this, they know that there is a special comment here. And the differential to the base one, so the difference between my patient gender and the patient gender in the original FHIR resource is this. The minimum value is 1. So it is mandatory. It's no longer 0 to 1, so it's no longer optional. It's now mandatory. It pretty much comes down, everything comes down to this. Then you have the birth date, and the birth date has an extension. Remember that most everything is extensible in FHIR, and that extension in the birth date is the birth time. So you might want to capture also not only the date of birth, but the time of birth. There is an extension for that, so we use it in the right place. So it's really adding extensions to the profile. The other thing is the marital status. We say, well, in this country, the marital status has a different set of values. So we look at the element definition, and it has we look at the element definition here, and this is the marital status. There's nothing about cardinality, so there's no min-max, there is nothing there, but the only thing that changes, so the only thing that is included here is the binding. And this is bound to another value set, which is this value set. So it's no longer the original value set. If there was one, it's now the country-specific value set. So this is how you do technical profiling. You add constraints, changes to the base. So just to show where this comes from, and I'll shut with the example very soon, because so this is kind of a hands-on, but I would like to have more examples from you. You see, the base definition for this is the HL7 patient. This is my base. So to the question of Carl before, we start with the base, and then we add things that we need. The things that we need is, for example, the constraint about the gender being mandatory, about the marital status being there, all those things. This is what we add. Now, this looks extremely complicated to do this by typing. And if you make one mistake here, the whole thing crashes because the system is self-validated. And this is why I wanted to mention the tools for you to be aware. there's a tool called Forge, which provides you a very nice, rich GUI, a nice graphical interface for you to do this. And the one that we can start, we can play a bit with it today is the FHIR school. Just to make sure that we don't have anything else. No, that's actually the end of our things, but I would like to take a few minutes now to run through one very simple example of how this could work using Sushi, the FHIR shorthand language. Is that okay?
Go for it.
Okay. Do we have any questions? Anything that I should pay attention to?
Yeah. When would you slice an attribute?
Okay, that's very interesting. Sorry, I should have mentioned this. Some things are multiple. So, for example, the patient identifier in this case, the patient identifier is multiple. Let me show the FHIR resource. Yes, patient. So the patient resource has identifier and it is 0 to many. Since it's 0 to many, you can do pretty much whatever you want there. But in some cases, you want to say, well, I don't care about that, but I want the passport number to be there, and I want the passport number to have this format, or I want the national ID to be in this thing. So everything else can be an implementation detail, can be optional. But instead of just saying this is 1 to many, because if you still say 1 to many, you don't know which one you mean. The notion of slicing is to say, okay, this is 0 to many. I'm going to define one slice, and one slice is the national identifier. I can show you how it looks like. The national identifier was here. It's actually to search for patient.identifier. And this is the patient identifier. We are saying, okay, in this profile, so in this profile that I'm working on, this becomes sliced. And the first slice is SSIN, that's the social security number. And that is defined in a given way with this attribute, etc. And it is mandatory. Once you use that slice, the identifier is minimum and maximum 1. So the slicing mechanism is for that, is to say this is a 0 to many or a 1 to many, but this one is reserved for that meaning. You can use it for saying this is the procedure code in LOINC, like the LOINC code can be mandatory, or the medication code in the national catalog format must be mandatory. Even if you have other identifiers there, you can use this one. So that's when you use slice. It's typically for things like identifiers codes that you have many, and you want to say this is the one, or this one at least I want to freeze in terms of specifications. What is meant by a FHIR implementation guide? There's a session for that in 2 months, I guess, and then we'll have some fun to putting this together. So what I'm showing now is the how and what means to do FHIR profiling. FHIR profiling means changing these elements. So there is this way of doing it. You can type this by Notepad. You can use Forge, or what I'm going to show now is the FHIR shorthand. So FHIR shorthand, it's a formal language that exists. It's defined in FHIR. You have the links in the PowerPoint. And then I can actually show this to you. Shorthand. You have this link is in the slides. And if you look at this, you see everything that you need to know about profiling using this shorthand language. Let's run through an example to see how easy this gets. And that's the focus of the profiling. So the focus of the profiling, after we understand the extensions, the constraints, etc., the actual work is providing that, based on that process, providing this. So let me see if I can find the profile. For example, let me just copy this because it's easier. So FHIR shorthand is just a way of transforming this. So this is a syntax. Huh? So let me just. So I'm going to create a patient profile. Sorry, I wanted to make the COVID vaccine, but that would lead more discussions, more abstract discussions. And given the shortness of time, I would like to show something that would apply for patient. And then we can extend the reasoning to the other ones. And maybe the implementation guide, in the implementation guide session, we will talk about the COVID vaccine. Is that okay? I assume so. So This is FHIR shorthand. So this is just another way of creating structure definitions. If I type things like this or a couple of keywords, I'm saying I'm going to create my patient profile, and it's based on the patient. Okay, if I click here, this should actually create a structure definition, because that is what it does, unless it complains that I have. No, it does. So you see, it creates a structure definition with some mappings that we don't really care about. And the only thing that it does not contain the snapshot, but it contains a differential, which has nothing. It just says that it has the element. Now, the language, so I'm not going to explain the language details. I'm just going to type so that you can see what is behind this. Let me just zoom in a bit. Gender 1-to-1. This is typically the thing that you have to do. If you say, I want the gender to be mandatory, there's a syntax for that, and then you do this. And if you do this in the right way, what you'll have is exactly the same output as you would have in the other one. So you see, it says the minimum is 1 because the maximum is already 1. So it just creates a differential. If you want to say what else? Let me go back to the patient and see what else we might want to do about the patient. Let's say I want to have the telecom. So I don't want to keep contact information for that patient. So telecom should not be there. So telecom should not be there. Then I just do this telecom 0-0. And this creates the differential that says, okay, from now on, there is no telecom for this patient. The interesting thing about this is that it allows us, so this tool is just a quick preview tool. Normally you would use other tools, or you'd use an integrated development environment to do this. But this shows you the concepts that we have. And I just would like to circle back to the very beginning, to the layered approach, because let me say this is my national patient profile based on patient. So this is the one that I use based on the FHIR patient. And now let me assume that I want to create something like my project patient profile. What I'm just doing here is just creating another layer. Oh, actually, and this is not based on the patient, but this is based on my national patient profile. If I do this, I just created the bottom layer and then a top layer on top of this. And I can add this as much as I want. Of course, this top layer doesn't change anything because I cannot, because I'm not, the gender is already 1-to-1. But remember that I said you can only constrain, you cannot expand that back. So if you say gender 1-to-1, because we think that gender is mandatory, and remember what I said in the beginning, if you make it too strict, then you are going to prevent other layers to be a bit more flexible. So if I try now to say patient gender 0-to-1, this actually should give me an error because this is no longer supported. Oops, sorry for this. It will most likely spit out an error. Yeah, there's an error there. So the tooling that I use, this is just for quick preview. This is not the tooling that we use. When we get to the implementation guides, we will see this kind of tooling in action. But this is how you do it. There will be the same syntax for extensions, and then you will have the extension, and then you can have the extension definitions. You can have a value set. So everything that we discussed, they are provided by the tooling, whether Forge or Sushi, Shorthand. So you can use these mechanisms to create your thing. So once you understand what's behind it, at the end, this is all element definitions with structure definitions holding it together, then you should be more comfortable to say, this is the profiling, this is what I do. Now, Nello asks one question. Base resource contains a Boolean type element. I want that element to accept either a Boolean or a reference to another resource. Do I do that with a slice? No, you cannot, because you cannot constrain. So you cannot constrain a Boolean to be more flexible than a Boolean is. A Boolean is just true or false. You cannot change that to be more flexible. I will take the challenge. Let me see if there's anything on Boolean on the patient. Yeah, there's active. So active is 0-to-1. You cannot do, so you cannot do this active. Oops. So the syntax would be active only string, for example, or sorry, only reference, you meant reference to condition, I don't know. I think this should work. Well, this will definitely not work because you cannot do that. You cannot say active, which is a Boolean. You are saying, well, but I just want it to be a reference. You cannot do that. What you can do is to add an extension to active. Actually, let me just create one because we still have 5 or 10 minutes. And let me just look it up. So creating extensions is a bit more of work, but it's good that we can go through this. Identify here. So you see, the reason I pointed to the resources is because this is very hard to know by heart. Most of what I do in profiling, I just copy bits of things and I adapt it to my context because I don't know the syntax, all the syntax by heart. Let me just put the extension here. Not this one. I don't want the extension here. I want to use, let me just define one extension. So I know that I have to use extension, give it an ID and a title and a description. I don't care. And it contains other stuff. Okay. Normally I should do this from the beginning, but it's actually better that you see this because then you're seeing what I'm doing, which is what I do in real life, is that to save time and effort and sometimes thinking power, I just resort to existing examples and I adapt them. So I know that I need to give it an extension. So the extension would be what? So Nello, what did you mean with, so can you give an example that would be a Boolean or a reference for active? I don't know if this would apply. Do you have anything else that would apply for patient? If not, I don't know. Let me just put the active as a condition. I mean, that's a bit silly example, but we can do that. So the extension active condition ID is active condition. In the FHIR specification, you'll see all that you need to know about these things being lowercase or uppercase, etc. So I'm just following the rules, which the good thing about the tools today is that if you make a mistake, the tool will let you know very loudly that you made a mistake. And that's fine. So the active condition for the patient. Sorry for this. And the description, let me just skip the description. I don't care about that. And I'm defining an extension, so I need to say what is the content of that extension. So let me just say this is a complex extension. That's another context, another thing that you can look up in the extension definitions. But let's say the active is the active. Let's see, this is active condition, which is 0 to 1, and MS doesn't really matter. And then the extension active condition. Actually, let me just do this. I'm just going to remove what is not necessary. Okay. Well, actually, that's a good thing. Now, Nello, you just tipped me off my direction here. So I'm going to continue this, and then I'm going to answer to your other question, because your other question would be done in different ways. So in this moment, I'm saying that the extension is active, is a reference. So I can say active condition 0 to 1, and then I can say the extension active condition value X would be only reference to condition. If we do this, and maybe I'm missing something when I do this, it should generate the extension, the structure definition for that extension as well. Okay, then I still have some errors. Yeah, wait, this error is not there, and this error should not be there. Maybe, yeah, so it works. So what we have here is that we have a structure definition for the national patient profile, the other one for the, I don't know what else, and we should have somewhere here, or maybe it was hiding it. Yeah, it did not show up, the active condition. So what we need to do is to say extension contains active specification. This is the syntax that we would use. So I would challenge you to follow the shorthand or to follow the training that we'll have that is going to be inciting on this. I now have 2 errors, which is better than I had before because I had no errors but no results. Now I'm having my patient profile. Let me just remove this one and try to do this. Maybe I made a syntax error, most likely. Yep. And then I have an extension, but you see here the structure definition already contains the extension. That's what I'm trying to do now, is to create the, so I create a profile, I create the extensions, and then I use the extensions inside the profile. So in this very simple example, besides the errors, and apologies, this is just my rush without looking at the syntax properly. What we have done is constrain one element up. So we say gender was optional is now mandatory. Constrain one element down. So telecom is now removed or forbidden. It was before optional, and we added one extension. So in short, this is really what the most, or the 80–90% of the work that we are doing in profiling is this. The rest of the work is adding, so value sets, we can also define it. So there is also syntax for defining value sets. We will go through that when we go through terminologies in the next, I think it's the next session is terminologies in 1 month. And then we will go through the putting this all of this together in an implementation guide. Yeah, so Nello, yeah, the way to do is create an extension. In this case, you could create an extension on condition. So you could say, actually, you could say condition, not so active dot condition. So you could say this active has an extension because everything is an extension. It's really pretty much that comes down to add extensions to wherever you want. It can be on the patient, it can be on the active element because the element is extensible. Yeah, and add constraints and extensions to any one of those. So Jean-Michel, you have, or sorry, Jan-Michael, sorry. With a lot of profiles in the FHIR website, a novice user of FHIR might not find the appropriate profile for a particular use case. How do we search a particular element is in a profile? The second question is, so the question here, I don't know if I understand. When do we tell ourselves that we need to extend? Let's use the example of the vaccine code and the vaccine product. It was a decision that those things are different. So there is a way to do. We could do that in slicing in FHIR and say, let's use the vaccine code to have a. Sorry, let's use the vaccine code to have a what is the code for the disease itself, and let's have the vaccine code, another slice for having the product. We could do that by slicing, but that seemed to me, or to the people that were working on us, and I was there, that would be a bit confusing the concepts between a vaccine and a disease. So we said we need an extension here. That decision is an educated guess. That decision is something that you might want to check with the community. So answering to Jan Michael, you might not find the appropriate profile. Well, there is a couple of repositories. I think I put the links there. Or yeah, there is some links there. Yeah. So if you want to do this, start with the chat. Go to the community if you find something else needed. And the other thing was here. Go to the servers that you want, and actually there's one resource. I'll try to add it still to the presentation, which is the registry.fhir.org, which is a list of, oh, sorry, not this one. Community, that was it here? Nope. FHIR. Sorry, I have to search for this. This one, yeah, so FHIR.org/registry. There is a list of many implementation guides, and if you want to search, is this about medication, is it, etc. So there is lots of work that has been done. use it with caution because they may be outdated. They may be something that you don't really want in your country, but always start. That's why the first point is decide your base. Do you want to be based on the FHIR core specification, or do you want to have something that builds on a national profile or on an IHE profile? For example, if you do things about security and soon about pharmacy and then devices, you can just relate to international guidance that already exists. So yeah, it's always an educated guess, but try to be as educated as possible, as in get a lot of, try to search a lot before you start doing your own things, which is a temptation because things are easy to do, as you will see later. But yeah, try to do some research, some digging through chat.fire.org. Anything else that so any other examples? Sorry, because so at least I managed to cover a bit of how the profiling is technically done. I left out the value sets because because of time and because we will look at this in the terminology sessions. But is there any questions that someone has urgent, then they would like to have more clear? Anything that we should say as follow-up to this? FHIR implementation guide and a FHIR package. We will handle that in the implementation guide discussion. Is that okay, Nello? Because it's the package can contain an implementation guide, or the implementation guide can generate a package. It's just a technical thing.
Perfect. I see we have just a couple of minutes left. So just a quick reminder, on June 18th, we will have an hour-long session where Jose will just be hanging out, answering questions. So if you have questions, you want to have a bit more of a conversation, that's a great way to have some of those questions answered. I am dropping in the registration for those chats right now. Otherwise, our next session is in about a month on terminology on June 30th. So please do register, and we'll see you then. And this recording will be on our website by the end of the week. So if you want to come back and look at anything again, it'll be there. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye all. Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good rest of the day. Bye.
You too. Bye.